In the quiet, unassuming town of Courtland, Mississippi, a dark mystery lingers in the air, one that has haunted the community for nearly a decade. On a chilly December night in 2014, a vibrant 19-year-old named Jessica Chambers was found wandering near her burning car, engulfed in flames, her body charred beyond recognition. However, in her final agonizing moments, she seemed to speak, whispering a name that could hold the key to the puzzle. But instead of clarity, her words plunged investigators into a web of contradictions and confusion that endures to this day. Who was Jessica trying to name, and how did a life full of promise end in such unspeakable horror? As the case unfolded, the town's secrets began to unravel. Trials came and went, but no justice has been served. Instead, a cloud of unanswered questions and chilling theories hangs over Courtland, leaving a community still desperate for closure. Come along as I journey into the mystery of Jessica Chambers' final hours, a case that still defies explanation. Stay with me to the end, and together we'll explore the strange twists, heartbreaking details, and lingering suspicions that keep this story alive, years after Jessica's tragic death. Join me for another strange and odd mystery story. On the evening of December 6th, 2014, Courtland, Mississippi was like any other small southern town. Its quiet streets and close-knit community gave little hint of the horror about to unfold. Jessica Chambers, a 19-year-old who had spent much of her life in Courtland, left her home around 5 p.m. after telling her mother she was going out for a short trip. She stopped at a local gas station, where surveillance footage showed her pumping gas and briefly interacting with someone off camera before driving away. About 2 hours later, first responders were dispatched to a car fire on Heron Road, a remote area just outside of town. What they found was shocking. Jessica's car was engulfed in flames, and nearby, Jessica herself emerged from the darkness, her entire body severely burned. Despite her catastrophic injuries, she somehow managed to walk towards the firefighters. They rushed to try and help her, trying to get any information that might help them understand what had happened. In a hoarse and labored voice, Jessica reportedly said a name, Eric or Derek. These words would become a central piece of the mystery. Was she naming her attacker, or were her words distorted by the unimaginable pain she was experiencing? The firefighters tended to her best they could, but it was clear her injuries were beyond immediate aid. Jessica was airlifted to a hospital in Memphis, Tennessee, where she tragically died the next day, leaving behind a web of unanswered questions and a town searching for justice. Jessica's death hit the small community hard. She was well liked, described as bright, and an outgoing young woman who had her struggles but always seemed to bounce back. She had a close relationship with her family, living with her mother across the street from her grandmother. Her father, who worked as a mechanic for the local sheriff's department, lived nearby with his wife. The Chambers family was well known in Courtland, and her death sent ripples through the town. What stood out most to investigators that night was the unusual crime scene. While Jessica's car was burning intensely, parts of it, the trunk and the engine compartment, showed less damage, raising questions about how the fire had started. But the most perplexing detail was Jessica herself. How could someone survive such extensive burns long enough to speak, even briefly? What happened between the time she left the gas station and the moment she was found? As investigators began their work, one question loomed large. Who was responsible for such a heinous act, and why did it happen? The discovery of Jessica Chambers severely burned and fighting for her life launched an immediate and wide-reaching investigation. Panola County Sheriff's Department, along with assistance from the FBI, Mississippi Bureau of Investigation, and other agencies, began piecing together the timeline of Jessica's final hours. There were few immediate leads, but one critical clue came from Jessica herself. The name, Eric or Derek, reportedly mentioned as firefighters tried to save her life. This single piece of information, though uncertain due to her condition, shaped the direction of the initial investigation. Authorities started by interviewing Jessica's family, friends, and anyone who had been in contact with her in the hours leading up to the incident. They combed through phone records, social media, and other digital footprints in search of connections to someone by the name of Eric or Derek. But this lead proved elusive. Jessica's family could not recall anyone with those names in her close circle, and local residents came forward to offer their assistance. Yet, no one seemed to match the description. The search quickly expanded to include Jessica's recent interactions. She had been known to associate with a variety of people in the small town, some of whom were involved in criminal activities. Investigators explored the possibility that her death might have been connected to a local gang. Jessica had been arrested in the past for minor offenses, including drug-related incidents, which led some to speculate she might have been caught up in something larger than anyone realized. However, local gang members, rather than retreating into silence, publicly offered condolences to the family and denied any involvement in her murder. Some even assisted in the investigation, which made this theory seem less likely as time went on. The prison system also came under scrutiny. Jessica's then-boyfriend was incarcerated at the time of her death, and authorities briefly considered whether he could have ordered a hit on her from behind bars. This theory, too, was eventually ruled out. Surveillance footage from the gas station where Jessica was last seen became a key focus. The footage showed Jessica interacting with someone just out of the camera's view before driving off. Investigators believed that this person might have been the last individual to see her alive before the attack, but identifying this person remained a challenge. Speculation about who she waved to in the video began to swirl in the community, adding another layer of mystery to the case. In the meantime, forensic analysis of Jessica's car and the crime scene offered few immediate breakthroughs. The fire had destroyed much of the evidence, making it difficult to determine what ignited the blaze or whether Jessica had been assaulted before the fire started. But as authorities worked tirelessly to put the pieces together, the lack of clear answers only deepened the mystery. With so many potential leads turning into dead ends, the investigators and the community were left with more questions than answers. The central mystery of who had done this to Jessica remained, but the most pressing question for law enforcement was simple. Would they be able to track down Jessica's killer before the trail went cold? As the investigation into Jessica Chambers' death unfolded, multiple theories began to emerge, some grounded in evidence and others fueled by speculation. One of the most debated aspects of the case was Jessica's final words. Firefighters on the scene reported hearing her say either Eric or Derek when asked who had hurt her. This detail led authorities down several investigative paths, but none proved fruitful. Despite combing through records and interviewing multiple men named Derek or Eric in the area, none could be definitively linked to the crime. While Jessica's reported last words seemed significant, they also sparked controversy. Some experts questioned whether Jessica, in her severely burned and physically compromised state, could have spoken clearly. During the second trial of the primary suspect, a speech pathologist testified that due to her injuries, which included severe burns to her lungs, throat, and mouth, it would have been nearly impossible for her to articulate any words accurately. The testimony contradicted the accounts of the first responders, who insisted that she had spoken clearly enough to name her attacker. With no solid leads from the Eric or Derek angle, the focus shifted to Jessica's acquaintance, Quinton Tellis. Tellis, a local man with a criminal record, became a person of interest after investigators discovered that he had been in contact with Jessica on the night of her murder. Phone records placed the two of them in the same vicinity just before her death. Further, Witnesses reported seeing Tellis near the scene of the fire, which heightened suspicion. However, Tellis maintained his innocence, insisting that he left Jessica alive and had no involvement in the crime. As the case against Tellis built, it became more complicated. Investigators found that he had deleted all the text messages between him and Jessica shortly after her death, raising suspicions about why he would try to erase their communication. Tellis explained that he didn't want to have messages from someone who had died on his phone, a reasoning that didn't fully satisfy investigators or the public. Despite this, the case against Tellis wasn't ironclad. First responders remained firm that Jessica had said the name other than Quinton's. Additionally, no physical evidence such as DNA or fingerprints directly linked Tellis to the crime. Still, the prosecution theorized that Tellis had attacked Jessica, perhaps in a moment of anger or frustration, and then set her car on fire to cover his tracks. Even as the case moved towards trial, many in the community were divided. Some believed that Tellis was guilty, citing his questionable behavior and connection to Jessica on the night that she died. Others pointed to the lingering mystery of the name Jessica had spoken and wondered if the real perpetrator had yet to be found. The ambiguity around her final words continued to fuel suspicion and doubt, leaving people to ask, did Jessica truly identify her killer, or was she simply too injured to speak clearly? In February of 2016, Quinton Tellis was formally charged with the murder of Jessica Chambers, more than a year after her death. The prosecution's case against Tellis relied heavily on circumstantial evidence, including cell phone records that placed him near Jessica on the night she was set on fire. Despite the absence of physical evidence, such as DNA or fingerprints, prosecutors were confident that they could prove Tellis's guilt. The central theory was that Tellis, after spending the evening with Jessica, fatally attacked her and then set her and her car ablaze to destroy any evidence. The first trial against Tellis began in October of 2017. One of the prosecution's key points was the fact that Tellis had deleted text messages and call records between him and Jessica shortly after her death. This action, they argued, was an attempt to cover his tracks. Additionally, several witnesses testified that they had seen Tellis in the area near the crime scene on the night Jessica was murdered. However, the defense presented a compelling argument centered around Jessica's final words. Multiple first responders testified that Jessica had clearly said the name Eric or Derek when asked who had hurt her. Tellis's defense team seized on this point, arguing that it raised reasonable doubt about his involvement. The defense also pointed out the lack of forensic evidence directly tying Tellis to the crime, arguing that the case against him was built on weak circumstantial evidence. The prosecution countered that Jessica was too severely injured to speak clearly. A speech pathologist testified that given the extent of her burns, it was highly unlikely that Jessica could have enunciated any names, let alone identified her attacker with clarity. This contradiction became a focal point of the trial, leaving the jury with conflicting accounts of Jessica's ability to communicate in her final moments. Despite days of deliberation, the jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict, resulting in a mistrial. This was a significant blow to the prosecution, but they remained determined to try Tellis again. In September of 2018, Tellis faced a second trial. This time, the prosecution presented additional witnesses and emphasized the forensic evidence that placed Tellis near Jessica at the time of her death. They also brought in an expert witness to dispute the reliability of Jessica's supposed identification of Eric or Derek, suggesting that her condition may have led to confusion. Once again, however, the defense focused on the lack of direct evidence and the inconsistencies in the prosecution's case. The jury remained split, and the second trial ended in another mistrial. After 2 trials and no conviction, the question remained, Was Tellis the true perpetrator, or was the real killer still out there? With no conviction and lingering doubts surrounding the case, the legal system hit a standstill. Quinton Tellis, while still a suspect, returned to prison in Louisiana to serve a sentence related to another criminal case, leaving the community and Jessica's family without the closure they had hoped for. Could a third trial finally resolve the mystery, or would the truth remain elusive? With 2 mistrials behind them and no convictions, the case of Jessica Chambers remains an open wound for her family, the community, and those following the investigation. The trials raised more questions than they answered, leaving lingering doubts about Quinton Tellis' involvement and the possibility that another perpetrator might still be out there. Despite strong circumstantial evidence placing Tellis with Jessica on the night of her murder, the prosecution struggled to overcome the inconsistencies in the case. One of the most significant challenges was the testimony from the first responders, who consistently claimed that Jessica had said the name Eric or Derek when they asked who had attacked her. This testimony, coupled with the lack of direct physical evidence tying Tellis to the crime scene, created enough reasonable doubt to prevent a conviction. Another point of contention was the state of Jessica's body when she was found. While the prosecution's theory was that Tellis had attacked her and then set her on fire to destroy evidence, there were bruises found on her body that raised questions about whether she had been assaulted before the fire. These bruises, however, were not conclusively linked to Tellis, leaving open the possibility that someone else could have been involved. Additionally, many have speculated that Jessica's involvement with people connected to local criminal activities could have played a role in her death, though gang members publicly denied any involvement and offered their condolences. Some in the community remained suspicious. Could Jessica have been caught up in a dangerous situation that escalated into violence? Or was her death the result of a more personal conflict, as the prosecution suggested with their case against Tellis? The answer remains unclear. Even as the prosecution built their case against Tellis, other theories continued to circulate. Some questioned whether the real Eric or Derek, mentioned by Jessica in her final moments, had ever been identified or adequately investigated. Others believed that Tellis, who had a history of criminal behavior, might have been involved but was not solely responsible for Jessica's death. To this day, Jessica's murder remains officially unsolved. Quinton Tellis, while still considered a suspect, is currently serving time in Louisiana for an unrelated crime. A third trial for the murder of Jessica Chambers has not been ruled out, but as of now, there are no new developments that would point to a different suspect. The case stands as a tragic reminder of the complexities involved in criminal investigations, where evidence and testimony sometimes fail to align with the search for the truth. Sadly, Jessica's mother, Lisa Chambers, passed away in 2018 without ever knowing her daughter's killer. Travis Sanford, who was her boyfriend at the time of her murder, was killed in a dice game in 2019. And many of the investigators and prosecutors have since retired. Some were transferred, and others have taken positions, leaving the case to grow cold. Even Jerry King, the man who found Jessica's car keys in a ditch near where her car was found, was also killed in a tragic accident, further compounding the heartbreak surrounding this unsolved case. As the years pass, the chances of finding justice for Jessica Chambers grow slimmer, leaving her loved ones and the community haunted by the unanswered questions surrounding her brutal murder. As we close this chapter, one question still haunts the investigators, Jessica's family, and Jessica's friends. Will justice for Jessica Chambers ever truly be found? Thanks once again for watching my video. My name is Vince. Would you please consider supporting my channel by either buying me a cup of coffee at the link below, or even treating yourself to some merchandise at my online shop? I truly appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this story, You might also enjoy the story of Who Murdered Mont Hiley. You will find the link to that story in the upper right corner of your screen. Thank you.